Ray Easterling was a player for the Atlanta Falcons back in the 1970s, and he committed suicide in April of 2012, just over a year ago. He has become, in many ways, sort of the face of what concussions can do to professional football players, to football players in general. This was his widow talking about how it changed him.
When I first met Ray, he was gregarious. He loved Jesus. He shared his faith with youth. Once he retired from football, he gradually became less and less able to deal with his injuries. But particularly starting in 1989, he began to experience insomnia and depression. His personality changed to the point where I had to pinch myself sometimes. I didn't recognize the person whom I'd married.
I mean, so Evan, this is how the physical nature of football, the hard hits, the concussions, can affect a player, not just while he's playing, but for years, for decades to come, for the rest of his life. And we're saying in the last segment, when I see a hard hit now, I find myself thinking of stories like that.
Yeah, when you talk to people like Brett Boyd or George Visco or some of the other people that I know, I'll call them up, say, hello, how are you? They say, oh, hey, Evan, how are you doing? Hold on one second. Let me get the notes from the last time I spoke to you to see what I said to you. There's memory loss. There's physical pain. And also, a lot of these guys with the settlement, probably people don't realize are on SSI, very young, or Medicare, very young. You're not 62, you're not 65. They have fallen into the safety net. And how many players are out there who have fallen into the safety net? Well, I can't tell you, but I can tell you of people who have told me who's on SSI or Medicare. So it is costing the taxpayers money to take care of these players, because when they collectively bargained in 1982 and 1987, the mantra was money now, money now, money now. Let's take the money now, because we're going to die anyway at 54. So let's get the money now. It's come back to haunt them. And I tell the players that you screwed up in 82 and 87. They don't like hearing that, but it's true. They did screw up. And maybe this settlement.
Well, yeah, so let's talk about the settlements. We had some of these former players who sued the NFL. There was a $765 million settlement that was announced on Thursday. What is that, Rob? What is that going to mean, in terms of the future of the issue of concussions in sports? The NFL has made rules changes and made procedural changes. Now they have the settlement. Where do concussions in the NFL stand right now?
Well, the vast majority of that money will go to benefit the plaintiffs, the former players who were involved in bringing this lawsuit. Over 4,000 former players who are suffering from various degrees of post-concussion syndrome or long-term effects of these injuries. So short-term, they'll be helped. Short-term, clearly the NFL is helped by this, because the PR of it, which has been so damaging to the league now for the last several years, is now changed. The NFL has stepped up. They did not acknowledge or admit any wrongdoing, which is very important in this whole thing. This was essentially like a case against a tobacco company for saying you were withholding and hiding the harm all this time. The NFL has not acknowledged that at all.
And so $765 million is small also compared to what
this is a $9 billion a year industry. So it's less than 10% of their revenue just for 2013. And this is spread out over 17 years. So it is not really financially significant to the league over the long term. I think the question is, and this settlement does not address this, and nothing yet has addressed this, can this sport be fundamentally safe to play? At the high school level, at the college level, at the NFL level, can the changes that have been made or future changes make the sport safe? And that is still...
And when you have the President of the United States who looks at all of this and says, I wouldn't want my kid playing football, it makes me wonder how many other parents out there, hey, you can play soccer. You have a 12-year-old kid. You can play soccer. You can play football. You can play lacrosse. Do one of those two. Don't play football. I wonder how many are thinking that.
I think that's the NFL's fear, is that conversation is starting to happen in suburban households. That conversation is starting to happen in households that never happened before, where what sport do you want to play? Soccer, where you have concussion issues, but the severity of the injuries are not anything close to the NFL. That conversation scares the NFL, because they rely on this being a heartland sport. They rely on people wanting to watch the sport because they know a kid who also played this sport. What you're going to have in the future, if the NFL doesn't address its culture, is a bunch of kids who play because they have to play, a bunch of kids who say, I know it's dangerous, but I've got to because this is my only way out.
Yeah.
It's my only chance to do something better for my family. The NFL doesn't want that narrative to start to really foment and start spreading across the country, because then they're going to lose their precious base. People are going to stop watching eventually if they can't identify with the players who are playing. And if it's players who are desperate, you're going to have boxing at some point. You're going to have sort of this arena now that is much more gladiatorial, that is less really palpable for the rest of the country to embrace. And that's what the NFL, I think, fears the most.
Although this conversation that's happening in the salons of Manhattan is light years away from what's happening in the fields of Texas. Okay? 1.1 million boys play high school football. It's the #1 sport for boys. It's going to be a long way off before that statistic diminishes. People play it not because they have to, but because they love to.
But could it be a regional thing? Because I cannot remember where I read this, but somebody had sort of mapped out what the death of football would look like in America. And they say it's not going to start in Texas, it's not going to start in the South, but it will start in the blue states, in Massachusetts and in New Jersey, and it will spread from there.
Well, when you look at NFL rosters now, I mean, the vast majority of the talent is coming from Florida, California, from the South. There are not a lot of players on
not too many Groton Masters.
Just not a lot. So it's already becoming more and more regional. But, the one thing I disagree with is I think this conversation has started nationally. I think there's always been a conversation between moms and dads, whether it's been Texas or the Midwest, and the mom typically is the one who's like, you know what, I don't know if I want you playing this sport. And these headlines that we're talking about right now, the mom's winning that conversation more than maybe she did 10 years ago.
I think we're going to see fewer and fewer 11 and 12-year-olds, but I still think it'll be really popular in high school. It's just so unbelievably popular as a spectator sport that you're still going to have people who aspire to do it. And I've also heard a lot of criticism. You weren't criticizing it, but you were characterizing this settlement as essentially chump change. We have to take into account that this was not a slam dunk case by any means. And if you're Kevin Turner, and if you're suffering from ALS, and you don't know how many years you have left, and you want your family to be comfortable, you'll take a few $100,000. They were asking for $2 billion. They got a little over $1 billion when you factor in lawyers' fees. A lot of lawyers who looked at the case said it's a pretty good deal for the players as well as for the owners.
I want to bring up something. You talked about high school and the mothers. Forget high school and the mothers right now. How about the school boards? School boards are being pinched throughout the country, laying off teachers, cutting programs, and you have the insurance going up and up and up. At some point, a school board member is going to have to say, hey, look, we have to set some priorities here. Do we want to cut back on math programs, social studies programs, English programs, electives, or do we want to pay these insurance premiums? And it's not only football, it's hockey as well, and cheerleading. Believe it or not, there's a lot of injuries in cheerleading. In girls soccer, there's a lot of concussions in girls soccer too. So at some point, these school boards are going to have to start making decisions on taxes.
But until then, as Selena says, we will keep watching. And we will move to the next segment, what we should know for the week ahead. We will have your answers right after this.